So welcome everyone to our project on multi-point fuel injection systems. So this is a part of the Automotive Systems MCL 321 course project. I am Somil Sahu.
And I'm Somesh Srivastava.
So coming to the introduction, as we all know, IC engines burn air fuel mixtures to make power. So the main goal is to extract as much performance as possible or have as high efficiency of the engine as possible. And for this, we require complete combustion of the fuel, which is done by maintaining the optimal air fuel ratio. We also need proper mixing of the air and the fuel, and for this the atomization of the fuel is necessary. And lastly, we also need to be able to vary the power output as per the user's demand, for which throttling is required. So this calls for the need for a fuel injection system that can fulfill all these demands. So now coming to the types of fuel injection systems. So the first is where internal mixture formation takes place inside the cylinder of the engine. So in these there are two categories: indirect injection and direct injection. These are more commonly used in diesel engines as they work on the principle of compression ignition, but they can also be used in GDI or gasoline direct injection. The next is external mixture formation, where the fuel and the air mix somewhere in the intake manifold outside of the cylinder, and then the air fuel mixture enters the cylinder and then burns over there. So the simplest form of this is carburetors, as we all know. This is a mechanical solution which is simple and cost effective. But the main issue with carburetors is that we don't have much control over the air fuel ratio, and this also leads to poor cold starts. So the second and the most popular version that we are going to talk about is manifold injection, which includes port fuel injection, specifically single point and multi point, and this will be the focus of our presentation. So as you can see here, this is how a carburetor works. It works on the principle of the Venturi effect. So a low pressure zone sucks fuel from the fuel tank, and the fuel is atomized because of the air that is flowing. So now coming to port fuel injection. So in this case, the fuel is injected using an electronically controlled solenoid valve at some point in the intake manifold. This could be near the throttle body in case of single point fuel injection, or it could also be near to the cylinder itself. This curve shows the typical demand of equivalence ratio when we are slowly increasing the intake airflow rate. So as you can see that the demand is quite different. At low flow rate, we need a high equivalence ratio, and at high power also we need a high equivalence ratio. So this is something that can easily be done with port fuel injection. So we can control the timing and the amount of fuel to be injected according to the drive mode of the vehicle. And so as I said, we can run fuel rich during cold start and high power applications. And similarly, if we want more efficient operation or fuel economy, which is basically in the middle region of this curve, we can run fuel lean also. So now let's see how a port fuel injection system works in real life.
Okay, so here we have a test bench which shows all the individual components of an electronic fuel injection system. So here we have the fuel injector itself, and here we have the main throttle body with the throttle pedal. So here you can see the airflow being controlled, and on the side we have the throttle position sensor which is able to detect the throttle position. And here we have the crank tooth gear, which is basically a proxy for the engine RPM, and the crank sensor is used to measure the engine RPM. And here we have another sensor to measure the equivalence ratio. So all these sensors in conjunction with the engine control unit or ECU, they are able to precisely control the performance of the engine by controlling how much fuel is injected and also by controlling the spark timing.
As you can see, this is a 4-cylinder inline SI petrol engine. Here we have the throttle body. When the driver presses the accelerator, then this type of motion occurs on the throttle body and the butterfly valve opens to allow the air to flow inside. The amount of air which is flowing inside goes into the manifold, and there are sensors present inside this entire engine system which calculates the amount of air which is coming in. The amount of air which is coming in is measured by the various sensors present inside the engine, and these sensors, the data from these sensors come into the ECU, and ECU calculates the optimal amount of air-fuel ratio which is required. The air-fuel ratio is obtained when the fuel pump takes the fuel from the fuel tank into the fuel rail and fuel manifold which is present. As you can see, this is the fuel rail, and here we have 4 different fuel injectors for each of the 4 cylinders in our engine. These red ones are the fuel injectors, and the ECU can independently control each of the injectors to maintain the timing of when the fuel is injected and the amount of fuel which is to be injected in each of these cylinders.
A major disadvantage of single point fuel injection systems and carburetors is that the fuel is injected near the throttle body, which means that we can have slightly varying equivalence ratios along the each of the 4 cylinders, and this can lead to inconsistent power delivery. So we can overcome this problem with the MPFI system since we are individually injecting fuel into each of the cylinders, and therefore we can have the exact same equivalence ratio, which can ensure complete combustion of the fuel and also leads to lower emissions as a result.
Now coming to the multi-point fuel injection system. In this, we have separated independent fuel injectors for each and every cylinder a particular engine has. These injectors will inject fuel into the intake port, which is just upstream of the intake valve, unlike the carburetor, which injects the fuel into in the center of the manifold. This allows for precise quantity of fuel to be delivered to each engine, and hence better control is present. The amount of air-fuel ratio and the timing of the injection is controlled by the ECU, which uses data from the different sensors which are present in an engine. And multi-point fuel injection system is nowadays widely utilized in light commercial vehicles, and earlier it was only used in aircrafts. MPF system is a combination of mechanical, electrical, and software technologies, as we will see here. The components of which comprise of an MPFI system includes the fuel injector, which is typically a solenoid operated valve which comprise of the mechanical part, and the fuel delivery system comprise of the fuel tank, the fuel pump, the filter, the fuel rails, and the regulator, which will control the fuel pressure. The air intake system will comprise of the throttle body and the air filter. The throttle body will be controlled by the driver, which presses the throttle in the car. There are various sensors which are present in the engine. Some of these include the throttle position sensor, the crank position sensor, the O2 level sensor, and the equivalence ratio sensor. And finally, the brain of an engine, the engine control unit ECU. There are different types of MPFI systems and based on the injection timing. The first is a batch type system. In this, the fuel is injected in batches, as you can see in this particular image. And typically, the intake strokes may or may not be aligned together with the injection of the fuel. In this case, when the intake stroke is not aligned with the fuel injection, the fuel sits in the runner until the intake valve opens, which and allows the fuel to enter the combustion chamber. This in turn is a disadvantage of this type of system because if the load suddenly changes before the intake stroke happens, then there will be inefficient use of fuel in a particular cylinders which utilize this formula. The second type is the sequential type. In this type of MPFI system, the intake stroke and the injection timings overlap with each other, and it is nowadays widely utilized in most of the automobiles. In this, the fuel is sprayed into the cylinder, and only when the valves are opening. And this allows for complete combustion as the appropriate fuel quantity is present, and manifold wetting is also reduced. Another type of MPFI system is a simultaneous one. In this, the fuel is injected into every cylinder at the same time. It has similar disadvantages as the batch type MPFI system. Now, moving on to the advantages and why MPFI system is utilized in the industry, is that because it can improve the responsiveness of an engine to sudden loads such as sudden acceleration or deceleration, and hence very fuel ratio. This also allows for better fuel utilization, which in turn improves the fuel efficiency, hence giving the user more mileage. We have the engine has better and precise fuel quantity control, which can lead to complete combustion and hence reduces the emission, which is nowadays a great issue to be raised. And the difference in power in every cylinder is also reduced because we have control on each and every fuel injector of each cylinder. The engine vibration are also less because due to complete combustion and smoother operation can be present. The fuel injection allows for better atomization and the swirl in the ejected fuel, hence proper mixing is also present. The different additives can be added to the fuel such that the carbon deposits do not come into the cylinder.
So now, lastly, moving to the drawbacks of this system. So one issue is that it requires regular inspection and the maintenance of the injectors, as there are a lot of components. So it is more complex and costlier than conventional systems. And lastly, there is a chance of misfiring in this engine. So that concludes our presentation on multi-point fuel injection systems. Hope you learned something, and thanks for watching.
Thank you.